Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into something pretty deep today, the link between philosophy and depression.
Ooh, that's heavy.
It is, right.
Right.
And get this, our source material is this really interesting Reddit discussion from Raw Philosophy.
Okay, cool. Reddit, so like real people, right?
Yeah, real people talking about their own experiences with depression and then bringing in all these philosophical insights. It's amazing.
I like it. So it's not just, academics in their ivory tower.
Exactly. It makes it so much more relatable, you know? Like philosophy suddenly becomes this practical tool for life.
I'm intrigued.
So one of the first things that jumped out at me was this idea of depressive realism. Have you heard of that?
Depressive realism? I don't think so.
Basically, it suggests that people dealing with depression, they might actually see the world more realistically, like without all the sugarcoating.
Huh. So less like through rose-colored glasses.
Exactly.
Interesting.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's like, what if depression actually strips away all the illusions, the feel-good stuff, and we're left with this raw, unfiltered view of reality?
Okay, so then how does that tie back to philosophy?
Well, the blog post that kind of kicked off this whole discussion on Reddit, it said that depression, and this is a quote,
Hit me with it.
depression, in most of its manifestations, is the healthy suspicion that there may not be an aim or point to existence.
Whoa! Right!
Okay, yeah, that's heavy. Like, whoa! So if you're depressed, you're just seeing things for how they really are, and it's kind of bleak.
It's a pretty bold statement. And it definitely sparked a lot of debate in the thread. Like, does that mean happiness is an illusion? What about meaning? Does it even exist?
Okay,
But hold on, there's another side to this.
okay, tell me.
Some people were pushing back, saying depression isn't about objective reality at all.
Makes sense, yeah.
It's subjective, right? They said it's about how we're interpreting our experiences, our thoughts. And sometimes those thoughts can be distorted.
Ah, like cognitive distortions. Yes. They were mentioning things like catastrophizing when you always think the worst-case scenario is going to happen,
Oh, yeah, I'm guilty of that one for sure.
or mind reading, when you think you know what other people are thinking even though you have no idea.
Uh-huh, been there.
Right. And I was reading this thinking, oh, man, I do that too. But it's so interesting to see it all in this context of philosophy and depression.
Yeah, it's like you said before, it's making philosophy actually relevant to everyday life.
Absolutely. And, you know, the conversation didn't shy away from the whole issue of how we view depression in our society.
You mean like the medical side of it?
Yeah, exactly. Some people were adamant that depression is just a chemical imbalance, you know, that it's all biology and you need medication to fix it.
Okay, so like a purely medical model. Makes sense.
But then others were like, hold up, it's not that simple. They see depression as a response to all these pressures, you know, like the pressures of society, maybe lack of meaning in life, maybe even just the basic struggle of being human.
Both sides make valid points, right?
I think so. It's complex. On one hand, medication can be a lifesaver for people. It really can.
Yeah.
But then there's that concern that it's just a Band-Aid, that it's not addressing the root cause of the depression.
Right, right. So what were some of the alternatives they suggested?
Well, someone brought up existential therapy. Have you heard of that?
I have, yeah. So it's less about symptoms and more about the big questions, right? Meaning of life, purpose, all that.
Yeah. Helping people find meaning in the face of, well, you know, all the stuff life throws at you.
Very philosophical. Okay, I'm liking where this is going. What else?
Okay, so the part that really hit me were the personal stories. Yeah, it's one thing to talk about these ideas, but then you hear real people talking about their experiences, and it's like, whoa.
Totally. It becomes real, not just theory.
Exactly. Like, one person found so much peace through medication, Buddhist, and Stoic practices.
Stoicism, that's interesting.
Right. It's like they found this practical way to apply philosophy to their depression, and it actually helped them. Oh, I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, me too. But I'm also curious about some of the other stories.
Yeah.
What else stood out to you? Yeah, me too. But I'm also curious about some of the other stories. What else stood out to you?
Well, one person talks about how they, like, rediscovered themselves, you know?
Yeah.
They found that staying true to who they really were actually helped them cope with their depression.
So like authenticity.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they were rejecting all those expectations, all that pressure to be a certain way. And instead, they were like, this is me, and this is what matters to me, even with the depression.
It's powerful, right? Like taking back your own narrative.
It is. It's empowering. Were there any other examples of people finding, I don't know, maybe an outlet in creative stuff?
Oh, absolutely. One user talked about using philosophy and art as a way to process their emotions.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Mm.
Art is therapy.
Exactly. And another user turned to sports to manage their symptoms. It was really interesting to see how diverse the coping mechanisms were.
Yeah. And the thread really highlighted that, what works for one person might not work for another. But finding what works for you, that's key.
Definitely. And speaking of finding what works, the discussion also got into the whole debate about the medicalization of depression. Some users were really pushing back against the idea that it's purely a chemical imbalance that needs meds.
Right. Right. Like we talked about before, it's not always that simple.
Right. One user even said that drugging a person would dim his vision, implying that medication could actually hinder a person's ability to, fully engage with life and philosophical thought.
Wow. That's a strong statement.
It is, isn't it? It really speaks to this ongoing debate about the role of medication in mental health. And of course, we're not here to give medical advice.
Definitely not. Everyone's experience is unique, and it's crucial to talk to a healthcare professional.
Absolutely. But this thread just shows how important it is to look at depression from different perspectives, including the philosophical one.
I totally agree. And another comment that really stuck with me was this. If depression is just a chemical imbalance, how many other things are just chemical balance, mere symptoms of good health?
Whoa. Okay, so they're basically questioning what we define as normal brain chemistry.
Right. And it made me wonder, could some of those traits we link to depression, like being more sensitive or maybe a little more critical of society, could they actually be strengths in certain situations?
It's a thought-provoking idea for sure.
It is. Okay, so we've talked about the personal stories, the philosophical angles, and the whole debate around medicalization. What about this idea of depressive realism?
Yeah.
That idea that people with depression might see the world more accurately without those rose-colored glasses. Do you think it can lead to a more, I don't know, cynical view of life?
It's a good question, and it was definitely debated in the thread. One user said that, yeah, seeing the world without those illusions could be jarring, even painful at first.
Makes sense. It's like suddenly seeing everything in black and white after living in a Technicolor world.
Exactly. But that same user also said that it could ultimately lead to growth. Like, by facing the harder parts of reality, by accepting those struggles, we might actually be better equipped to find real meaning and purpose.
Okay, so it's like saying we need to see the darkness to appreciate the light.
I think that's a good analogy. But then it raises another question. If depressive realism can lead to growth, does that mean depression itself is a positive experience?
That's a tough one. I don't know if there's an easy answer to that.
I agree.
Yeah.
But what the thread really emphasized was that depression is complex. It's not just good or bad. Its impact is different for everyone.
Right. Some users talked about how destructive it had been in their lives, leading to isolation and hopelessness. But others described it as this catalyst for change.
Right, like it forced them to look at their lives in a new way, face their fears, and ultimately find a deeper meaning. So it's not about romanticizing depression. It's about recognizing its complexity and potential for growth.
I like that, recognizing the complexity.
Yeah.
And something else that came up a lot was the idea of authenticity.
Oh, yeah, that was big.
A lot of the users talked about feeling this pressure to be happy all the time, to be successful, but it felt fake.
Right, like they were rejecting that fake it till you make it mentality.
Exactly, and they were searching for something deeper, something more real.
It's almost like depression was a rebellion against that, a yearning for authenticity.
I like that, a yearning for authenticity. And it's interesting how many of them found that authenticity through philosophy.
Yeah, it's like philosophy gave them a space to explore those darker existential questions that maybe they couldn't address anywhere else.
It makes you think about how much we try to suppress negative emotions in our society. Maybe if we actually made space for those feelings, questioned our ideas about happiness and success, we could find a more genuine way to live.
I think that's a really powerful idea. And it kind of ties back to what we were saying about the limits of purely medical approaches to depression.
Right. We can't just focus on the biological or chemical aspects. We need to acknowledge the existential side, too.
Exactly. One user even said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically, if we just treat depression as a chemical imbalance, then how many other aspects of human experience are we oversimplifying?
Wow, that really makes you think.
It does, and it challenges us to look beyond the diagnosis and see the whole person.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about a lot. Personal stories,
Yeah.
medicalization, authenticity. But at the heart of it all, There's this search for meaning, right? Even when faced with depression, with suffering, there's still this desire to find purpose.
It's like this inherent human drive. We want our lives to have meaning.
I agree. But what did the users actually say about finding meaning? Like, what were some of their experiences?
Well, some of them found meaning through philosophy itself, grappling with the big questions about existence, challenging their own beliefs. Others turned to creative outlets like art, music, or writing.
It's like they were channeling their experiences into something beautiful and meaningful.
Exactly. And for some, meaning wasn't about these big abstract ideas. It was about connecting with other people who understood what they were going through.
That makes sense. Sometimes just feeling seen and heard can be incredibly powerful.
Definitely. And speaking of powerful, several users mentioned finding inspiration in Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. Have you read it?
Oh, yeah. Back in college. Frankel's story is so powerful, so inspiring. Even in the concentration camps, he found a way to find meaning, to hold on to his humanity. It's incredible.
It is, and I think that message of resilience really resonated with the Reddit users.
Yeah.
Even in the face of so much suffering, we still have a choice in how we respond.
It's a powerful reminder that even when things feel hopeless, we still have the power to find meaning.
Exactly. And another philosophy that came up a lot was Stoicism.
Stoicism, yeah. I can see how that would be helpful for dealing with depression.
Right. It's about focusing on what you can control, accepting what you can't, and finding peace in the present moment.
So it's like a way to manage anxiety and find some stability.
That's a good way to put it. And users shared how they used Stoic techniques to reframe their negative thoughts. Focus on taking action where they could and letting go of what they couldn't change.
So instead of getting caught up in those negative thought spirals, they found a way to step back and find some peace.
Exactly. And for others, Stoicism helped them accept their emotions without judgment, like understanding that feeling sad or down is a normal part of being human.
It's like learning to be okay with those feelings, not fighting them.
Right. And that's what I find so inspiring about this connection between philosophy and depression. It's not about quick fixes. It's about using these tools and ideas to explore the human experience, find meaning amidst suffering, and navigate life's challenges with a bit more wisdom.
It's like philosophy gives us this new lens to view our experiences, even the difficult ones, and maybe even find some beauty in them. But, speaking of beauty, one user's comment really stuck with me. They said that for them, coping with depression wasn't about finding some big, grand meaning to life.
Oh, interesting. So what was it about then? Oh, interesting. So what was it about then?
It was about those small, everyday moments, like finding beauty and connection in the simple things.
I love that. Meaning doesn't have to be this huge, overwhelming concept. It can be in a cup of coffee, a walk in the park, or just a good conversation.
Exactly. And you know what? That focus on the everyday kind of reminds me of something else we talked about. Self-compassion.
Oh, yeah, that was a big one in the thread, right?
Yeah, a lot of users talked about how learning to be kinder to themselves was so important, quieting that inner critic.
It's huge, right? Because that inner critic can be so brutal, especially when you're already feeling down.
Totally. It's like we have to learn to be our own best friend, offer ourselves the same kindness we give to someone we love.
But how did they talk about actually doing that? Like, were there any specific techniques or practices? Well, some mention mindfulness meditation, focusing on the breath, observing your thoughts and feelings without judgment. Others talked about journaling, like using writing as a way to process their emotions and get to know themselves better.
It's like building a whole support system from the inside out. But did they talk about external support too? Like friends, family, therapy?
Oh, yeah, definitely. A lot of users emphasized how important social connection was, reaching out for support and realizing they weren't alone. They talked about connecting with friends, family, therapists, and even online support groups.
It's a good reminder that we're all connected, right? Like our well-being is influenced by our relationships and communities. It's not just all in our heads.
Exactly. And that idea of connection actually leads to a bigger question that popped up in the thread. How does society itself impact our mental health?
Oh, interesting. You mean like societal pressures contributing to depression?
Exactly. Some users felt like the constant pressure to be happy, successful, to have it all together, it was just too much.
I mean, think about it. Social media, economic uncertainty,
Yeah.
the climate crisis, it's a lot to deal with.
It is. And some users felt like these pressures contributed to a sense of, I don't know, alienation, maybe even despair, like they were feeling lost in it all.
So it's not just about individual psychology then. It's also about the systems we live in.
Right. It's about recognizing that our mental health is influenced by the world around us.
Hmm.
And it makes you think, how can we create a society that's more supportive? One that values things like connection and compassion over, I don't know, maybe achievement or material success.
It's a big question, but it's definitely worth asking. And, thinking back on everything we've discussed, I think this Reddit thread really shows just how relevant philosophy can be.
I agree. It's not just some abstract academic thing. It's a tool we can all use to make sense of our experiences and find meaning in the world, even when things are tough.
Right. And that's especially true when it comes to something as complex as depression. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I just want to say, keep exploring those questions. Keep searching for those glimmers of meaning and beauty in the everyday.
I love that. And remember, you're not alone in this. There are so many others out there who are also searching, questioning, and trying to live a more meaningful life. Thanks for joining us.
See you next time.